Do you remember your childhood playground? It was probably abuzz with sounds. Laughter, yelling, swings squeaking. It may have even been filled with movement. Running, jumping, climbing. Bodies in motion at play. For students with autism and who have trouble processing sensory information, the joyful chaos of play can be overwhelming. A cacophony of input and unpleasant sounds that their brains are struggling to assimilate and respond to. And if they can't stay regulated, another word for calm, they can't feel safe enough to interact socially. Let's explore sensory processing. We are all very familiar with our 5 senses: touch, taste, smell, sight, and sound. But there are 2 senses that are invisible, yet key to our development from birth on. The vestibular system is related to movement and has receptors in your inner ear. The proprioceptive system is related to how one perceives his or her body position, with receptors in muscles and joints. Together, they provide the foundation for balance, posture, and motor coordination needed for play and life. These senses help adults navigate the complex world around them. For children with trouble processing sensory input, the neural pathways that these sensory messages travel on are like roads that get blocked. They can't organize a response to the sensory input they receive, which can result in behaviors and responses that aren't familiar to those without this challenge.
Maybe we should take it more out of the sun.
After years on the playground supporting students on the autism spectrum, we found some very common sensory trigger points that cause deregulation. In this part of the workshop, we're going to walk you through some of them and offer suggestions on how to support students who are triggered by a high-impact environment like the playground. Remember that every child on the autism spectrum is different. Some will struggle to integrate one sensory input, while others have multiple triggers. General and special education teachers can work closely together to share what the student's specific triggers are to better support the interaction for all students. Sound deregulation in children can be triggered by a specific sound, like a lawnmower, or a pencil on paper, or general ambient noise. You can see students put their fingers in their ears, run away from the big activity and noise, or engage in yelling and verbal scripts, which are repeated phrases or sounds.
So we'll take him over and we'll get his...
Solutions: provide simple earbuds or headphones to muffle the sound. Start your inclusive playdate away from the source of a high-impact sound. Quiet spaces near trees, a picnic bench with a quiet activity like students reading to each other. Sing songs that are familiar to that student and used in the classroom. The familiarity of it can be comforting. Or find out what songs they love on the radio and sing those. Also, when introducing musical instruments to students who are sound sensitive, start with low, deeper tones like drums. Introduce the musical sounds one at a time and find out what's appealing to that student. Go low. If you're on a playground, go underneath the upper ramps. Any space that's contained, crawl spaces, tunnels, provides more of a sound barrier. Some children are hypersensitive to touch. Light or unanticipated touches can feel unbearable due to oversensitivity. Children can also react negatively to specific textures, for example, sand or types of clothing. Students experiencing this may pull away from touch, overreact to specific textures, or physically push someone away who's touching them. So, how can we help? Here are a few things you could do. Instruct the buddies from the general education classes to make sure the student sees them coming first.
You want to hold it, Oscar? Yeah. He wants to hold it.
Say his name and make eye contact before reaching out physically. Find out what textures the student gravitates to. Try bumpy sensory balls or objects with different textures. Play through games and objects versus direct physical contact. Throw a ball back and forth, swing together, play a game of chase with the dancing scarves, or pull out the parachute for more visual stimulation versus tactile. Input to muscles and joints, like pushing, climbing, or hanging, calms the touch system.
You like this? So see, it's just a matter of trying new things.
Other students might be undersensitive to touch. These students may be sensory seeking because their bodies aren't registering touch as easily. They may only register big movement and deep pressure in their bodies. Some of these students may make bigger movements or repeated movements, like jumping or clapping their hands, constantly touching things or people, making loud noises, or speaking loudly. Or they might get physically closer to others than is considered typical. Here are a few things we can try. Provide games that offer bigger movement. Chase, obstacle courses, jump rope.
Whoa! You a football player? Huh?
Give that student something to squeeze down on or push against, like balls they can squeeze, heavy objects that they can move around. If they do have repeated behaviors like clapping their hands, you can tell their general education buddies to do the same. It's a technique called mirroring, and it communicates to the student with autism that he's being heard by mirroring back what he's doing. When a student's senses aren't working properly, they can have a hard time physically locating their body in relationship to the space they're in. Big undefined areas can feel physically overwhelming. When that happens, the students can often feel lost in space. It's common to see them physically running around the space in loops, dropping low to the ground, or finding smaller spaces to crawl into to get some physical boundaries. We also see students go into physical or emotional tantrums due to feeling really overwhelmed.
Come on, be good. I'm going to take you somewhere fun.
If that happens, here's a few things you could consider trying. If you're playing on your campus, define the space. Find an area partially fenced or use orange cones to create a visual border. Provide smaller crawl spaces that the student can hide in, like tunnels or kids' tents. Keep that student's activities more structured. A visual game, a predictable repeated activity versus letting them wander around in the space. If you are on a playground, find places to hide that are safe.
Over here?
Whoa!
Some students like to explore unobstructed places underneath the top deck of the playground. We've had students play under the structure for the entire day because it was physically more contained and they felt safer. Students on the autism spectrum can struggle with a change in routine, unfamiliar spaces and actions, and sudden transitions. If the play space is unfamiliar to your students, consider showing them pictures of it ahead of time. You can also show them pictures of the students they're going to be playing with to increase their comfort level. For students who are on the playground and struggle to transition back to the classroom, their general education peers can help. If they're playing a game, play it from the playground right back to the classroom. Or sing a favorite song while you transition. Something to make that shift a little easier.
Okay, you're going to come in for a landing, but I admire you because you came up with a way to swing. Okay, so when we stop, you're going to take your buddy's hand and you're going to walk over because we have to leave and they have to leave. So we're going to count it down. 5.
Now that we understand a little bit more about some of the potential needs of our students with autism, we're ready to bring the Playdate to a successful close for everyone. Before we get started, here's a summary of what we've learned about supporting autism at play.